Sometimes in chess, you might be down a lot of material, and it looks like you're about to lose. And the resign button might look quite appealing. But today, I'm going to show you 2 games that'll prove why you should never click the resign button. Game 1 is between 2 players in an actual tournament game that I found. For the sake of the privacy of these 2 players, their names have been replaced with black and white. Game 1 began with pawn to e4, followed by pawn to e5, knight to f3, d6, known as the Philidor opening, knight to c3, and then knight to c6. And all of this is very principled so far, getting the pawns out, the knights out, and this is followed by pawn to d3. It's a bit passive, blocking in this bishop, although it's not a really bad move. Black follows with knight to f6, which is very good, very principled, especially considering that these players are probably rated around 700 combined. So, bishop to e2, allowing the king to castle. b6, with potentially plans for bishop to b7, and this is followed by castles. So now white has achieved a pretty good setup, with both knights out, a bishop out, and a king that's quite safe and castled. And this rook is now able to join in with the fight. After developing the bishop to, let's say, e3 or g5, white is in pretty good shape. After bishop to a6, an interesting move, we have bishop to g5. Now, white has developed all of her pieces, and with pressure on the knight, and black still has his king in the center, which is not good, considering that white's pieces are now able to jump in to the attack. After knight to g4, black has made a very, very bad mistake, as bishop takes d8, wins the queen. And this is exactly what is played. After king takes, we have knight to g5. This is also a very, very good move, because 1, it threatens to fork the king and the rook, and secondly, it attacks the knight. It's a discovered attack on the knight. So black, seeing that the knight is about to jump in and fork him, plays king to e8, moving the king back, and hangs the knight. After h6, attacking the knight, for some reason, I think white decided that this bishop has done enough, has taken the knight, and now maybe the bishop will go on a stroll to, let's say, the edge of the board, to c8, where it can be taken 2 ways. Plus, the knight is hanging. So, black evidently sees that the bishop is hanging and doing nothing on the edge of the board and takes the bishop with the rook. So now, white plays queen to h5. And this is actually a tricky move, threatening both queen takes on f7 and pinning the pawn to the rook. So let's say if pawn takes, then white can win the rook. So instead of that, black did pawn to g6, which is a very good move. And this attacks the queen, so that the queen has to move. And now the knight is still under attack. So instead of moving the queen, white plays queen takes g6, blundering all of his advantage and losing the queen in one go. Maybe white decided that it was time to sacrifice the queen, since white was up a queen. But black has 2 of white's bishops, and white has only black's knight. So this is a really bad move. And maybe white was drunk, so. After queen takes, we have pawn takes, very good. And now the knight has centralized itself on e6. And now there's bishop to g7, which is a highly suspicious move, hanging the bishop in one go. And after this, white plays b4, which achieves absolutely nothing, except maybe with the plans of working the bishop and the knight on b5. But black can just take the pawn, and also move the bishop. But here, black found the best move, which was actually taking the pawn. And this is given a brilliant move by the engine, because if you take the bishop, then king to f7 traps the knight. And the knight can't really move. For example, if the knight moves here, the pawn takes. If the knight moves back, then king takes. And anywhere else, white will lose the knight. So black had a really neat find with the brilliant move knight takes b4. And after this, white, seeing that he just lost a pawn, plays a3, losing another pawn on c2. And black takes. After rook to c1, white loses yet another pawn on a3, and also d3, which black takes. And now black has 3 pawns compared to white's 1 pawn taken, and black is up 5 points in material. After knight takes g7, finally taking the bishop after the bishop was hanging for 1, 2, 3, 4. So on the 4th move, white took the bishop. We have king to f8, which is not really good, because king to f7 is best, trapping the knight. King to f8 allows the knight to escape. But instead of escaping with the knight, white somehow didn't see that the knight was hanging, or thought that the knight's life was hopeless, and that it was the end of his journey. So white played h3, the very powerful h3, hanging both the knight and the rook. And here black decided to take the knight, which is a good move. We have now the powerful rook sacrifice. Rook takes c2, sacrificing the rook. Seeing that this rook was under attack, so the other rook decided to sacrifice for his friend and give up his life. We have bishop takes, knight to e2, rerouting the knight, c5, gaining space, and now, as you can see, black has this very powerful pawn chain. We have a4, sacrificing another pawn, because white had nothing better to do. c4, not taking the pawn. h4, moving another pawn. Now bishop takes e4, finally taking a free pawn. a5, sacrificing another pawn. I think by now white had just given up and didn't want to play anymore, but didn't want to resign, because resigning is for losers. Just kidding. We have pawn takes. Knight to g3, bishop to d3, attacking the rook, very good. Rook moves, c3, knight to h1, and the knight has decided to trap itself in the corner, not doing anything while this pawn is about to promote. c2, getting closer and closer to promotion. Black is playing really well. f3, allowing the knight to go here and attack the bishop. But honestly, there is no reason for a knight to be moved to h1. c1, into a queen, finally promoting. Rook takes, and now black has 2 rooks and a bishop, and white has only 3 pawns, and a knight and a king. And black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. We have king to h2, rook to b8, bringing the second rook down. Very nice, very powerful, very principled. Knight to g3, moving the knight back. Rook b1, maybe setting up something here, thinking that it's mate. We have king to h3, allowing the king to escape here, but pawn to h5 shuts down. We have h5, very good. King to h2, and thinking that it's mate, black plays rook to h1 check. Not seeing that the knight can take the rook, and the knight takes, which is the only move. And we have rook takes h1, sacrificing the rook again. And right here, white resigned. Seeing that if king takes, then white's position is hopeless, because white doesn't have any pieces left, and these pawns won't be able to do anything. And this pawn will just march all the way down and make a queen, and this pawn too, and make a rook, and this pawn too, and make a knight, and this pawn too, and make a bishop. And you get the idea. So in this game, black hung his queen and his knight, only for white to mentally combust, and then for white's queen to commit suicide, and bishop to commit suicide, and all those poor pawns as well. This is why you should never resign. If you enjoyed Game 1, you'll definitely enjoy Game 2, which was played by my friend Eldrick against a Canadian dude. And in this game, Eldrick played like a drunk and hung all of his pieces, but somehow managed to pull off a comeback win, which shows that sometimes in chess you have to play like a drunk, because you might win a few games. The game began with e4, followed by e5, all very principled, d4, and this is known as the center game. It is where white places 2 pawns into the center, asking black to take them, and then maybe go for the Danish gambit and go for a few tricks. Or just tick with the queen and get attacked with the knight. So in this game, the Canadian dude played d4, and here Eldrick played a very bad move, f6. And this is a really bad move because you weaken this diagonal. And the queen will love to come here and attack the king. For example, after it takes, if you take back, queen here is deadly because you'll have to either run the king out and your king gets chased around a whole lot, or you can block with a pawn and get forked, and you're going to lose the rook. So this is why f6 is a really bad move. But in this position, the Canadian dude played d5, advancing and getting more space, which is not the best move. Knight to e7, developing the knight. Knight c3, a very good move. d6, securing a pawn triangle in the center, very solid. Bishop to c4, developing the bishop. For 2 600s, this isn't bad. No major screw-ups yet. We have a6, maybe with plans to attack the bishop with b5. Bishop to b3, anticipating b5 and moving the bishop back. b5, Eldrick follows this plan even without the bishop on c4. Meanwhile, weakening this diagonal, which we'll see show up in a few moves. a3, giving the bishop more breathing room. c6. And here I think Eldrick is trying to give this knight some room, so if takes, then knight takes, and this knight will be free. We have bishop to e3, very good developing the bishop, and controlling this long diagonal. C takes d5, and this is a bad move. It's a mistake, because here you have this weak diagonal, and then you're just weakening it more. And so if either the queen or the bishop get in, this rook is going to be trapped. You can't move the rook. So after bishop takes, this is why it's a really bad idea for knight takes d5. Because after queen takes, the rook is under attack, and you can't really defend the rook. If you move the bishop here, the bishop will just get taken, and you'll lose the rook. Or actually, you won't lose the rook, but if you move the bishop here, you'll lose the whole bishop, and this is quite bad. So here Eldrick decided that the rook was a goner and needed to die because it was going to die anyway. So the rook decided to sacrifice itself with rook to a7, getting chopped by the bishop on the next move. And maybe here Eldrick decided that this game was over and he shouldn't fight on anymore, so he decided to sacrifice the knight as well. And then we have bishop to d7, bishop going back, queen to c8, bishop b6, a5, sacrificing a pawn, which was then taken, queen to a6, attacking the bishop, bishop to b4, very good, saving the bishop's life, f5, very aggressive, opening up the center while the king is in the center, not a good idea, especially since all of your opponent's pieces are aimed at your king. E takes f5, bishop takes f5, knight to f3, finishing development, going on to castle, queen to b6, and right here, the Canadian dude played castles long. giving up this pawn. So does Eldrick see it? Well, I think he saw that the pawn was a target, so he decided to make the very powerful move. Bishop to h4, sacrificing the bishop. So this bishop is a goner, and it then died. And this bishop is now under attack. And right here, Eldrick has 4 seconds on the clock, and his opponent has 13 seconds, a whole 10 more seconds than him. We have queen takes f2, defending the bishop. And you can see the eval here, it's plus 17. White is close to checkmate, because this pawn is going to fall, and we have the queen and rook battery. And Eldrick should probably resign, but good chess players never resign, because after rook to f1, Eldrick checkmated the Canadian dude. Eldrick was down 11 points of material with 3 seconds on the clock, and he still managed to checkmate his opponent. So this is why he should never resign.